Have you ever found yourself getting frustrated because someone didn't respond the way you expected? Sometimes the biggest leadership lesson isn't about changing the other person, it's about understanding them first. Welcome to Breakthrough Weekly. I'm your host, Monica Pelayo. Every week, we explore why people stay stuck even when they genuinely want something different. Because lasting change begins when you understand what really has been holding you back. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, thank you for being back. Today's episode is titled The Leadership Lesson Hidden in a Pile of Toys. Let's begin. Yesterday afternoon, I was sweeping my office before a client session. As I moved the broom across the floor, I found myself weaving around toys, cars, building blocks, and action figures scattered everywhere. If you've ever had children or grandchildren, you probably already know my first thought. What a mess. Then my attention shifted to my grandson, Joel. I already knew that if I asked him to pick up his toys, he wouldn't do it by himself. I would need to help him. The real question wasn't whether I would help him. The real question was how I was going to ask him in a way that would make him genuinely want to say yes. How could I make it fun? How could I turn it into something he would want to be a part of instead of something I had to force? It's a small question, but it's actually one of the most important questions any parent, leader, or manager can ask. We spend so much time thinking about what we want someone to do, and so little time thinking about how the other person actually experiences the request. That gap is where most conflict lives. Almost instantly, my mind went back to another afternoon when I had faced the exact same situation, one that ended up teaching me more about leadership than almost anything I've studied professionally. I remembered asking Joel to pick up his toys. He looked at me and yelled back, "No, you pick them up." I'll be honest about what happened inside my own mind because I think many parents, grandparents, leaders, and managers will recognize themselves here. My immediate thought was, I just gave him an instruction and he's refusing to follow through. Almost instantly, I felt frustrated. I interpreted his response as disrespect. It wasn't until much later, with some distance and reflection, that I realized where that interpretation had actually come from. I grew up in a home where you didn't question authority. If my parents told me to do something, I was expected to do it the first time. If they had to repeat themselves, there were consequences, and many times those consequences were physical discipline. Without realizing it, I had carried those expectations into adulthood and into how I read other people's behavior. So when Joel didn't immediately listen, my mind wasn't only responding to that moment, it was responding through years of conditioning that had shaped how I interpreted authority, obedience, and respect. That an important distinction because it means my frustration in that instant wasn't really about a 4-year old and a pile of toys. It was about a belief I had carried since childhood that being asked twice meant being disrespected. Joel had no idea of any of that history existed. He's just a little boy who didn't feel like cleaning up yet. But my nervous system reacted as if something much bigger were happening, because in a very real way, for me, it was. As my frustration started building, this is what was going through my mind. He's not listening. I need to hurry up and get this done. He needs to clean this up. I shouldn't have to repeat myself. Why is he not picking up his mess like I told him to? In the moment, I wasn't aware those thoughts were creating my emotional state. I thought I was simply getting frustrated, as if the feeling had appeared out of nowhere. It hadn't. The frustration was being generated sentence by sentence by the story I was telling myself about what was happening. The more those thoughts continued, the more frustrated I became. Had I not interrupted that pattern, my actions would have almost certainly have been driven by those emotions rather than by any conscious decision on my part. If I had continued down that path, I probably would have raised my voice, become more forceful, or turn the moment into a power struggle. Joao likely would have responded emotionally as well, and what started as a simple request to pick up toys could easily have escalated into both of us yelling, him in defiance and me in frustration, neither of us actually getting any closer to a clean floor. This is the sequence I now teach my clients because it plays out identically whether we're talking about a toddler, a teenager, an employee, or a spouse. A thought creates an interpretation. The interpretation creates an emotion. The emotion is left unchecked, drives a behavior, and that behavior creates a consequence, one that often reinforces the very story we started with. We rarely question the first thought because it happens so fast, it doesn't even feel like a thought. It feels like the truth. Instead, I paused. In that moment, I had a choice. I could continue reacting from my frustration or I could interrupt the pattern. Most people would probably think that pause was for Joelle. It wasn't. That pause was for me. One of the most universal rules of the mind is that emotion overrides logic. Most of us believe we're thinking logically when in reality our emotions influence far more of our behavior than we realize. Once our emotions become activated, our thinking narrows, making us far more likely to react automatically than respond intentionally. This is not a character flaw, it's how the human brain is wired. Under stress, the part of our brain responsible for reasoning and perspective quiets down, while the part responsible for threat and self protection takes over. In that state, we don't see the whole person in front of us, we see the threat we've decided they represent. I understood that if I reacted from frustration, my emotions would dictate my behavior instead of allowing me to choose it. By pausing, I gave myself the opportunity to regulate my emotions and recall everything I already knew about Joel, rather than everything my conditioning was telling me to assume about him. I wasn't trying to come up with clever parenting technique. I simply began recalling everything I had already observed about him. I knew he rarely wanted to do things by himself. He was always looking for someone to play with him, be beside him, or participate with them. I also knew he was incredibly competitive. Those weren't guesses or assumptions, they were observations and patterns I've noticed over time, and they were far more useful in that moment than any amount of frustration would have been. Instead of repeating my instruction, I changed my approach. I told him that if he wanted my help, he could ask me. He looked at me and said, Grandma, can you please help me? Of course, I replied, and we started picking up the toys together. For a while, it worked. Then he stopped, and I asked him to keep helping me. I don't want to do it anymore, he replied. I paused again and asked myself, what else do I know about Joel? Immediately, I remember how much he loves competition. I smiled and said, Hey, Joel, do you want to play a game with me? Let's see who can get more toys in the basket faster. His eyes lit up instantly. No, I'm going to win. Within seconds, the room sounded completely different. We were laughing, teasing each other, and racing to fill our baskets. When we finished, Joao proudly announced, I won. I smiled and replied, Yes, you did. Quietly, I smiled to myself because in reality, we had both won. The toys were picked up, the expectation never changed, only the emotional experience did. Nothing about the task itself was different between the version where he refused and the version where he raced me to the basket. What changed was the meaning he attached to it, and the meaning I helped create by understanding what he actually cared about connection and competition rather than insisting he simply comply. I see the same dynamic constantly in my work with clients, whether we're talking about a business owner who's trying to motivate a resistant team member or someone trying to reconnect with a partner who has stopped listening. We assume the problem is the behavior in front of us, the toys on the floor, the missed deadline, the silent treatment. Usually, the real problem is that we're addressing the task and ignoring the person. Standing there yesterday with the broom in my hand, I realized I wasn't just remembering what had worked with Joel. I was recognizing how much I had changed. I already knew that when Joel came downstairs, I wasn't going to simply ask him to clean up. I already knew I was going to invite him into a game because I understood what motivated him. The biggest lesson wasn't that I had found the right words, it was that I understood the person standing in front of me. Years ago, I probably would have reacted. Today, I still experience frustration. I'm still human, and there are moments when I'm triggered. The difference is that I understand what's happening inside my own mind when it does. Understanding human behavior and the rules of the mind hasn't made me perfect, it has made me more intentional. It has helped me recognize that my first interpretation isn't always the truth, and that when I regulate myself first, I create space to choose my response instead of repeating an old pattern that was never really mine to begin with. Before this journey, I thought leadership was about having the right answers. Today, I believe leadership begins with understanding human behavior. It isn't repeating instructions louder or expecting everyone to respond the way you would. Leadership is understanding that every person brings a different history, different motivations, and different behavior patterns, and that those differences aren't obstacles to work around. They're information you need to lead well. The better I understand human behavior, the more intentional I become. That doesn't mean lowering my expectations, it means changing my strategy for reaching them. Joel still had to help pick up the toys. The standard never moved. What moved was my approach because I stopped assuming there was only one acceptable way to get there. This lesson extends far beyond parenting. It applies to leading teams, coaching clients, building relationships, and navigating conflict of almost any kind. A manager who reacts to a missed deadline the same way I once reacted to Joel's refusal will likely get the same result I would have gotten: escalation, defensiveness, and a relationship that gets a little more strained each time. A manager who pauses long enough to ask what this person actually needs in order to succeed is far more likely to get the outcome and the relationship they actually want. We often spend so much energy trying to change someone else's behavior that we forget the first behavior we need to manage is our own. If this story resonates with you, perhaps the next time you find yourself frustrated, pause before you react. Ask yourself, what am I thinking? Where did that interpretation come from? What do I already know about this person? How can I adapt my approach while keeping the same expectation? These four questions take less than a minute to ask, but they interrupt the exact sequence, thought, emotion, behavior that leads most of us into conflict we didn't actually need to have. In my experience, that's where meaningful influence begins, not by forcing change, but by understanding behavior well enough to create the conditions where change becomes much more likely. The toys still needed to be picked up. My expectation never changed. Joel didn't suddenly become a different child. The only thing that changed was that the leader standing in front of him. There's a reason nothing seems to change when we keep reacting the same way. Whether it's with our children, our teams, our partners, or the people we're trying to lead, most of us were never taught to separate what someone did from the story we immediately told ourselves about why they did it. We inherit that habit long before we're old enough to question it, the same way I inherited mine, and we carry it into every relationship we have until something interrupts the pattern. Sustainable change begins with understanding the patterns that have been quietly shaping your decisions all along. Awareness is what creates choice in the first place, and different choices are what create different outcomes. And how you lead, how you parent, and how you show up in the relationships that matter most to you. Whatever brought you here today, you're not alone. Many of the people I work with come to me saying same version of the same thing. I'm tired of feeling this way. I know what I need to do, I just can't seem to do it. I feel stuck. Those feelings almost always trace back to patterns from long before adulthood, patterns that were never examined because no one ever taught us how. If you've ever wondered why you react the way that you do, or you're ready to understand the patterns driving your own behavior, I love to talk with you. My complimentary exploratory call is simply a conversation. You tell me what's going on and what you like your life to look like. And together we figure out whether my approach is the right fit for the change you're looking to make. You can book your call at www.thrivingpathways.com/appointment. If something in today's episode felt familiar, don't ignore it. Recognition is often the first step towards meaningful, lasting change. If someone came to mind while you were listening, share this episode with them. You never know who might need it to hear this. New episodes of Breakthrough Weekly are released every Monday and are available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Thank you for listening. I'm Monica Pelayo. Until next time.